Hey guys, I had a few minutes on my hand because the baby's sleeping upstairs and I'm just wrapping up some final things for my day, and thought I would create a training video that showed you guys how I created an ad for Craigslist. It's something that's advertising Vision Launchers, which is the company that I work for. We were going through Craigslist and noticed a lot of the ads on there looked really poor. They were just cheesy and didn't communicate well, and we knew we could do something better. So that's what we set out to do. So this video is going to walk you through the process that I took to recreate that ad. So enjoy. See the ad that we did for Craigslist. Like I said, nothing too fancy, but definitely a little more interesting than most of the other ads. Well, actually all the other ads that we found anyway on Craigslist. And we wanted something just a little different and something that kind of would get attention, and we felt like this ad did. So I'll basically kind of break down how this ad was created and show you how to recreate it. As is the case with all these videos, they're unscripted and first take usually, so if I mess up here or there, that is why, but I think that provides kind of a different element. You kind of see how this was built in a real world setting. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a document that's this exact size. Easiest way to do that is to just copy my background layer. So I just did a Command A, Command C for copy, Command N for new, and the default values that show up in here are whatever's in my clipboard. Makes it very easy. So when I create a new document, it's the exact same size. Next thing I'll do is find a color here that kind of matches that golden color that was used in the background. So there we go. I'll make a new layer and option fill with that. I'll call this background. The next thing I want to do is actually create these golden rays that are coming down from above here. They're subtle, but they add a little texture to the background and kind of an interesting look. So to do that, I'm going to make another new document, and I want this one to be maybe a few times bigger than what I have by default. So I'm going to just change the resolution to 300 here, and actually, I could keep this at 72, and I'll just change this to 3200 pixels. Pretty huge, but that'll give me a good effect that I'm looking for here. So I'm going to go to my gradient tool now and just create a simple black to white gradient, just going vertically down the document. Then go under Filter, Distort, and Wave. What I'm looking to do is create some nice solid lines going from one end of the document to the other. And I'm playing with the amplitude to get these really well defined. So if I go all the way, they get just solid black and white. But a little bit of gradient kind of adds some interest. So maybe set it about right there. And as far as the wavelength goes, that looks pretty good. We'll see how that looks once I actually go through the next step. Actually, you know what? I'm going to undo that and create just a couple more lines by increasing the wavelength, or decreasing, I guess. There we go. Perfect. That should be good. The next thing I'm going to do is just go under Filter, Distort, and Polar Coordinates, and I'm just going to click OK on that with the default settings, and you see we get this cool burst effect. You will notice that this line here is a little thinner than the other lines, and the reason being is because of this little thin guy right here. So if I wanted to clean that up, in this case I don't have to, since that bottom part isn't going to really show. We're just using the top part of this burst. But if I did want to clean that up, I would just go in here and crop that out. Let's make it a little thinner. Zoom in here. And where's the end of this thing? There we go. I would just basically crop that line out altogether, and then try that filter again, and you see it's gone, but now this gap's a little bit larger. That means I've got one extra white space here. You see I've got white on each end. We would want to crop that out as well. So basically just go in here, crop that to black, and run that filter again, and perfection. So now I'll take this layer and just move this over here to this guy. So now you see, because I made that document so big, that's why I did that, so I can move this around and not hit the bottom of this guy down here. So basically just center that up, and in fact I should probably add some center guides here, just so when I'm actually getting into this I know where the true center is. So to do that I usually just create a selection here in the document, drag in a ruler from the side. It'll snap to the center of that selection. If you don't have a selection there, it could snap to the center of whatever layer selected, so I just usually get in the habit of creating that selection first to make sure I'm perfectly centered up. Now I have a point of reference for this here, and alright, awesome. So now that that's centered up, you'll notice obviously it's black and white, and we need to change that to color. So I'm going to set this to layer mode multiply first. We'll see how that looks. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Command U on this layer to colorize it. So I'll go ahead and click Colorize. I'm going to bring the lightness up on it so I get the golden effect. And basically, somewhere around there, that should work just about perfectly. The layer is actually red. If I hit this to normal, you'll see it's got kind of a red tinge to it. It's very light because I brought the lightness all the way up. But when it's set to multiply, it gets kind of an orange effect, which looks perfect. It's a little strong right now, so I'm going to bring the opacity of this layer down just enough. And there we go. That looks pretty good. So I'll call this layer first. The next thing I want to do is add some kind of light effects, give it some dimension on this background layer. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this and go into my gradient overlay. And rather than a linear, I'm going to select a reflected gradient, and I'm going to set it to 0 degrees. And then I'm also going to reverse it because I want the lighter part in the middle. And then I'll set the layer mode to overlay. And you can see there we get some good lighting effects. I'm going to go ahead and bring this down just a little bit. It's a little strong right now, but you can see it goes from being totally flat to having some dimension there with the edges burned a little bit. Bring it down just another little bit. Awesome. I didn't do this in the original ad, but this might look kind of cool. I'm going to try it real quick. I'm going to create a new layer and go into my brushes. I'm going to hit X to switch my background and foreground colors. And I'm going to go ahead and add a nice big brush here with hardness is 0. And I'm just going to hit this guy. Oops, bring my opacity up. Hit this guy right in the center here. And then we're going to try this. I'm not sure if this will work, but I'm going to blow him up a little bit. And I'm going to move him up to the top. Kind of make it look like it's bursting out of some light there. We'll see if we like that or not. Bring the opacity down a little bit. Cool. Just gives it a little, even more dimension up there. Just kind of looks like it's bursting out from a source of light, which is kind of cool. So I'm done with this guy. I'm going to close him out. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is actually make this banner. There's a couple different ways I could do it, but I think I'll do the easy way today. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, set my background color as black, and just create a banner here. So I made a selection. I'm going to Option Delete to fill that with black, and then that's a little deep. I'm just going to transform it with Command T, shrink it down just a little bit. I'm going to duplicate this layer and drag it down here and make it a little narrower just by using Command T again. And I'm going to bring a guide down to find the center point of that layer so that I can create a nice bookmark edge here. I'm using the polygon lasso tool, but I held down Shift while I made this selection in order to constrain it at a 45-degree angle. And then I'll just move it over here, hit delete, and I've got a banner edge that's perfectly centered up. Now that I'm done with this guide, I'm going to remove it and move this under here. So let's see, I'll call this banner, and this is the right edge. So for this banner, I'm going to add a stroke on it first off, just to, and a stroke color, I'm going to make it roughly the background color just to make it easier to see what I'm doing. I want to basically add some dimension here. So by adding a stroke on it, it almost makes it appear that that edge is in the back, which is what I want. So this edge here, I'm going to kind of move it into the right position wherever I think it should go. And for a final effect here, I'm basically just going to take this polygon lasso tool and drag it in here to give it even more, make it kind of look like it's folded back. Just delete that edge off of it. Okay, excellent. Pull that up a little more, and good. So now I'll duplicate this, call this left edge, and I'm going to do Edit, transform, flip horizontal. And that will reverse that, so I can drag it in on the other side. Get it in roughly the same position, and we're good. So now what I want to do is actually remove this stroke because it's, whoops, I'm sorry, because it's actually, what the heck did I just do? Whoops, undid something I didn't want to do. But I want to remove this stroke because it's actually, you can see it's yellow, so it's actually different from the background color. I want it to just be completely transparent. So the easiest way to do that I found is basically just hit create layer. From this background layer, you get the outer stroke. You can hold Command and click on that layer to make a selection. I can delete the stroke. I'm going to merge these two edges, actually, left edge and right edge. No reason for them to be separate, so I'm going to highlight both, hit Command E, call this edges, and then I'm going to go under Layer, Layer Mask, and hit Hide Selection. So that's going to add a mask in there to hide whatever I had selected from this edges layer. I use layer masks whenever possible because it allows me to go back and change things if I ever want to. If I want to reduce the size of the stroke or remove it all together completely again, you know, I've got total control over this layer mask and what's hidden and what's shown. If I just cleared the pixels entirely, that would mean I wouldn't be able to go back and change things. So, like I said, whenever possible, I like to keep it that way. But in this case, that looks good to me. I don't expect to actually have to go back and change that. So I'm just going to go ahead and merge those two layers and call this banner now. So now I've got my banner. Now the only problem is it's, well, first off it's huge, but we'll take care of that later. But it also doesn't have that nice curve like it does here. So again, there's a few different ways to do that. The quickest and easiest way I found is basically just rotate it on 90 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and get it centered up perfectly on this document. Create another layer here. Put that there. And now I've got a good center point where I can just go and snap this right into the center, just like so. Then under Filter, Distort, there's one called Shear. And I can basically just take this middle point and push this banner just like so. And for some reason here, do I have a selection or something? It should go right in the middle. You know, if I take this middle point and just push it up, I'm not sure what's going on, but that's okay. I could still take this and just kind of eyeball it, get it right in the center. So you see I'm basically affecting this layer as I drag this guy around. But we'll try this first, see how that looks. And it's not quite even. You can see there's more on the top here than the bottom. So let me try this real quick. Let me try and create a selection first. And then go back into Shear. There we go. So the goal is to basically just be able to move this point along the center line and affect it, you know, the same either way. So it looks like I've accomplished that now with the selection. Not sure why it was working before, but it doesn't really matter. So basically just pull this middle point up here just to where we get a good amount, and that looks pretty good to me. Click OK. Awesome. So now I can rotate this back, and you see I've got a nice curved banner. So the next thing I want to do is add some text to this. So we've got Make Your Business here in white. So I'll go ahead and add some text in all caps, Make Your Business. I'm going to go ahead and make this white. And I'm going to add this, put this in one of my favorite fonts called Headline 1, and bump up the size of it. And this font is a little tall, so I'm going to go ahead and reduce the height of it here. Otherwise it looks pretty dang good. But you see I need to add a curve to it. So the easiest way to do that is go into your Warp Text tool right up here. Go ahead and set that to arc, and then I can adjust it from there. So kind of a weird problem that you'll get with some fonts in Photoshop. You see how this here is, the font just looks weird. The O's filled in, this kerning's all, or the tracking's all weird between the N and the E here. It kind of smashed together. This K's got a funky thing going on. That happens sometimes. I'm not exactly sure why, but the best way to remedy it that I've found is to create a new layer, maybe at 400. I'll just do 300 dpi. I'm going to do maybe 2,000 pixels, and then I'm going to take this text layer, drag it over here to my, whoops, I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to this new Photoshop tab thing, so bear with me. Drag this over here to this new layer, and I'll set this in black just so we can see it, and bump up the size. So for whatever reason, once this is re-rasterized at a larger size, typically that problem goes away. For whatever reason here, we're still stuck with it. Very frustrating. Looks like we need to make it ginormous, so I'm going to go ahead and set my canvas size here. Let me just get a better idea how big this is. I'm going to go 15 inches by 15 inches. There we go. So you see, when you make the text huge, it looks okay. It's only when it's really small that funky problem happens. And my phone is ringing. Go ahead and ignore that. Sorry about that. I'm going to add a little bit more track in between this N and the E still. It's a little tight, so just clean that up a little bit. And alright, looks good. So I'm going to set this text to white now. And then, obviously, if I were to move this back into my main document here, we'd end up with the same problem because I would size it back down. But what I'm going to actually do is convert it to a smart object first. So that way we're not actually modifying the text layer, we're just kind of changing the appearance of it when we move it back to our main document. So go ahead and move it here. And you see it's huge, but since it's a smart layer, I can actually reduce the size of it without affecting the point size of that type, because we're actually just modifying the contents of the layer. It's kind of hard to explain, but hopefully that makes sense. If you're not familiar with smart objects, highly recommend looking them up online. They can be extremely helpful, not only in situations like this, but in other situations as well. So, okay, cool. So I'm going to make some modifications to this text again. First thing I want to do is change the arc of this a little bit. It looks like it needs to be just a little more arced. So go back into here and let me change my canvas size real quick. Change the height of this. Give me a little more room to work, and maybe actually the width as well. 4,000 pixels. Okay, awesome. So the hardest thing about working this way is obviously you can't really see what you're doing until you do it, so it's a little bit more challenging. I'm going to change the vertical distortion of this as well to try and get a perfectly straight edge up here on the side. That way we don't get the weird distortion from that text. As you see here, this M doesn't line up with the straight line here, which kind of bugs me, so we'll try and fix that. So, awesome, that looks good. Go ahead and close this. Awesome, that looks excellent. So, there we go. So now we've got our banner in there, and basically what I'll do is take these both, convert them to a smart object, and now I can modify the size of that banner non-destructively and change it to whatever size it needs to be. Alright, and actually in looking at this, it looks like it needs just a little tiny bit more curve. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this to edit this smart object and edit this text again. And I'm going to add just a little bit more bend to it. Close this, save it. Yes. Close this, save it. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to move that text down just a tiny bit. Much better. Okay, excellent. So now we need these words suck less in here, and I'm going to use another one of my favorite fonts to create that. Let me close this here. I don't need this anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to, let's see here, whoops, there we go. So the words suck less are going to be put in here. So let's see, creating a text layer, type them in. And for these, I'm going to use another one of my favorite fonts right now called Chunk 5. Go in here, let's see, there it is. And reset my kerning here. And reduce these down. Trying to get it about the same size as what we had before. Obviously, you want to put that in the black. Move it up here. And we want to actually create a stroke around that, kind of like what we did before. So I'm going to command click on this layer to select it. I'm going to expand that text layer just a little bit, or the selection, I'm sorry. Under select, modify, and then expand. Try 5 pixels real quick. See how that looks. And then I'm going to go under suck less and add a layer, layer mask, and hide selection. Again, I prefer to use that rather than anything else because we'll get a nice layer that we can go back in and modify if we need to. The only thing I'm noticing here is because of this edge, we're getting kind of a not real sharp edge there, so I'll fix that real quick. There we go. Same thing here. The reason being is it's such a fine point that kind of fades out, so when I created a selection and expanded it, that fade kind of got enhanced. So just cleaning that up real quick. Take this corner off. I'm basically just creating a selection and filling it with black or white to get the effect I want on that layer mask mode, which is selected right here. Awesome, so that looks pretty dang good. Size might be a little different. I can actually unlink the layer mask here and reduce the size of this. I'm going to actually squeeze this text together a little bit first. Maybe not. You know what? I'm going to leave it as is. We'll see how it goes. But I want to add those stars in that are on either side of this text. Yeah, it definitely is actually a little bit too big. So I'm going to unlink those, reduce the size of this text down a little bit. And then I'll move this text. So the reason I unlinked the layer mask is so that I can move this text and the layer mask stays. So that way, you know, it's always hidden behind that banner. If I had these linked up and I move this, you can see that that text is always going to be hidden there, whether I move it or not. But when I unlink them, I can move these guys independently, and that way it's always blocked where I want it to be blocked. So it just works a little better. Okay, cool. So I'm going to group these guys, highlight them both, hit Command G, and call this header, just so I can tell them apart. Friendly Harley Davidson clan driving by. Okay, so now I'm going to add those stars in. So I'll go to my custom shape tool here, and let's go ahead and find a star, just a simple 5-pointed star in this guy. There we go. And add them in right here. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball the position, doesn't have to be exact. That looks pretty good. Duplicate that, hold shift while I move it over so that constrains to the same horizontal axis, and drop it in right there. Looks pretty good. Cool, so there's my header, pretty much. Dimensions are a little different, the banner's a little more curved, but I think we'll be able to work with it still. So the next thing I want to do is add in this other text. It should be pretty straightforward. Actually, to do that, I'm not even going to recreate it here because it's just plain text. I'm just going to take these two text layers, drag them over to my document here, and drop those in. The other thing, I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit. Okay, looks good. Add these to the header group and move this whole group up. Oops, you see what happened when I did that? The text there is getting blocked out still. I need to link up those guys again. Link the layer to the layer mask. Right here. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so now, going back here, this text block here is pretty easy to make. I'll basically create a new folder called text block. So when I create new layers, it'll go under there. And I'll go to my line tool here, and that's a pretty good thickness, looks like by default. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a line that goes all the way across. And then what I'm going to do is create a little shape for the little star that goes in the middle. Basically, just create this from here. I'm going to hold down Option, so I create from the center point of my cursor. Hold down Shift to constrain it so it's the right size, or the right dimensions. And there we go. Move it up here, and I basically want to add a break in for that line. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, create a selection, hold down Option to create from the center point, get a good dimension on either side, and I'm going to go to my line layer here, shape 2, add a layer mask, and hide selection. I'll click click off of this, turn off my guides. You see we've got a star with the break there. I'm going to move the star up just 1 pixel. And I'm going to take both these, duplicate them, and move them down, just like so. And then in between these, I need to add this text rather than basically recreating this. I'm going to just drag in this layer, just like so. And the only thing I'm going to do differently is bring the lighting down on this a little bit. I know we're running a little tight with the this top header being a little deeper, so that'll hopefully give me a little more space. Oops. And move these guys up. Awesome. So then we've got our text block. So next thing I want to do is add this banner in here above this header. Pretty easy to do. Basically create a new layer. Go ahead and find a nice deep red color. And I'll create just a solid block fill there. Then I'll double click on it, go into gradient overlay, turn that on, set the overlay mode to, or set the blend mode to overlay, bring the opacity down, just gives it some depth, some lighting effects rather than it just being a flat block. Makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional, a little more lifelike. Click OK, and we'll add that text to it. And let's see, I'm going to basically just drag that text layer over rather than retyping it. Basically just using myriad, it looks like. So nothing too fancy. Bump up the size of it here, fill out this block. Ease this down. Make this a little wider. And I'm trying to make it as wide as possible now because after I rotate it, unless I convert to a smart object, I won't be able to change the dimensions of it again. Just as an example, if I rotate this and put it up here and I realize it was too short, if I wanted to make it longer, I wouldn't be able to because it's the wrong angle. That's why I want to make sure I get it set correctly before I actually rotate it. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And you can see when I rotate it as well, the layer effects that I have on it don't rotate with it, so they're still going top to bottom rather than horizontally across that bar. So I'm going to go ahead and actually rasterize the layer effect here. Rasterize layer style. Awesome. So now I can group these guys, move them over, and stick them up here. I'll just reduce the size down until it looks about right. Obviously I don't want it to cover up anything too important, so I'll try and get the rotation and size right. That looks pretty good, so I'll just apply that. And I'll group these items into a layer group called banner. Okay, excellent. So now I'm going to move down into this bottom portion here. So these are actually something I already had created. These are something that we've used in the past for some other advertisements, so I just basically drag and drop them over, which is what I'm going to do here as well, just for the sake of time. But I just took screenshots and overlaid them into, screenshots of some websites we've done in the past, and drop them into this template that I created of a web browser. So I'm just going to take this whole layer group, drag and drop it over, and throw it down here on the side. Okay, and then this text on the side is pretty straightforward as well. Rather than recreating that text, I'm going to basically just drag and drop it over as well. But I'm not going to bring those checkboxes over because I'll recreate this here. Let's see. Okay, so there's the two layers. Drag them, drop them over here. Excellent. So the checkboxes are pretty easy to do. Create a new layer group called list. I'm going to create a new layer and go to default colors, X to swap my colors, and M to go into my marquee tool, and create a square selection by holding down Shift while I create that selection to constrain it to an even top and bottom size to get a square, and then fill that with white just by hitting Option Delete, and then Command D to deselect. Call this checkbox, and looks like it's a little too big, so I'm going to reduce the size down just a tad. Basically, we want to get one per line, so they can't be too large. That looks pretty good. And now what I want to do is actually add some dimension to this. You can see in the original here, these look kind of like they're indented and have some dimension. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Basically do this all under layer styles. So the first thing I'm going to do is add an overlay, gradient overlay, and reduce the opacity down just to give it some shadow. And then I'm going to do an inner shadow to give it some depth. And just kind of play with these settings until I get the effect that I want. And then finally I'm going to add a stroke, and I'm just going to do a 1 pixel stroke and bring the opacity down just to kind of define that box but not create too strong of a definition. And you can see it gives it some depth. It's still looking a little bit too big, so I'm going to reduce the size of it down just a little bit more. And again, I'm holding down Shift on my keyboard to constrain the proportions. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now I want to go ahead and create these check marks that are in the boxes. And let me pull up the font book, because I can never remember which character creates that checkbox. Going to my Dimbax collection. I think it's Wingdings 2. And yes, here we go. So basically, you just highlight that, copy it, go back here under my text layers, and paste it in. And then obviously we have to change the font to Wingdings 2. And we have a check mark. So I'll reduce this down just a little bit. That looks pretty good. I'm going to set the color of this to that red color, the dark red, and that looks pretty good. Yeah, perfect. So basically just take these two layers, duplicate them a few times, and again duplicate these. And one more time. Okay, so there are our checkboxes. I'm going to take all those guys, group them in a folder called checkboxes. So you see I use layer grouping quite a bit. It just really makes it easy to try and figure out where everything is that you need. Really easy to disable stuff on and off if needed, or move an entire group. If I decide the checkboxes are too close to that text, I can just select it, arrow them over, arrow them back. It's very simple. Okie doke, so this whole list I'm going to move over just a little bit and bring our websites over just a bit. Tighten that up. Okay, so you see this last one under here, we want to cross out just like we did in the original, kind of make it look like crayon or a marker, kind of cross it out. So I'll basically just add a new layer above here. I'll call this red X, and I'll go ahead and select a red color, kind of a deep red again, and I want to go into my brushes now. So we're going to actually do a brush, one of these guys. I can't never remember which one of these does the effect that I want, so I'll just try a few real quick. That was pretty good. I think I like this one. Or which one was it? I guess I'll some of these. These look good. So I'll basically just take this, reduce this down, and just cross this out, just using freehand. That looks pretty good. Rotate it, just like that. And then we want to create some some text that looks like it's hand drawn. That says dance lessons. Okay. Rotate this. And I'll put this in the journal font. It kind of looks like a hand-drawn font. And then you can see it's just straight up and down. Usually when I do hand-drawn text, I want it to look a little bit like it's, obviously we can't draw on a perfectly straight line, so I'll go in here to the warp text tool and usually select arc and give it just a little bit of curve, and usually a little horizontal and vertical distortion as well, just to make it look a little bit more realistic, so it's not so straight up and down. And you can see a before and after on that, straight and then curved. Has a little more character. So just do that. Get that in position. And finally now, we need our logo at the bottom. Obviously that's something that I have done in existing PNG or PSD, I can't remember. But I'll basically pull that over onto our final layer here. And just like that, it's pretty good. I'm going to reduce the size of it down just slightly. And for this list, drag that whole layer group down just a little bit. Maybe over to the left a little more. Get our text block down here, drag that down. We weren't as tight on space as I thought we might be, so can just kind of space everything out now. And let me see if there's anything else. I believe that is it. Yeah, that's it. So you can see it's not exactly the same, but pretty dang close. Since it's recreated here, things are a little different, but for the most part, it's the same. So that pretty much sums up how that ad was created, and I hope you learned something interesting. Thanks for watching.